Silas Thorne knew the sound of trouble long before it showed its face. Out here in the high, jagged shadows of Montana territory, trouble didn't always come with a shout. Sometimes it came on the back of a wind that tasted like iron and old secrets. Silas was a man carved from cedar and stubbornness. At 55, he'd spent more years talking to his horses and to people, and that suited him just fine. He had a small ranch tucked into a valley that the sun only visited for a few hours a day. He had a dog that didn't bark, a rifle that didn't miss, and a past he'd buried so deep he'd almost forgotten where the headstone was. But that Tuesday, the silence of the valley was broken. It started with a horse, a buckskin mare, lathered in sweat and shivering, standing at his perimeter fence. The saddle was empty, the stirrups swinging like a dead man's ghost. Silas didn't hesitate. He grabbed his coat and followed the back trail into the scrub brush. He found her a mile out near the creek bed. She was huddled under a shelf of slate rock, her black mourning dress torn to ribbons by the brambles. Clara Vance. He recognized her, though they'd never spoken. She was a widow from the ranch 3 miles over. People said her husband, Elias, had fallen into a ravine 2 months back. People said she'd gone simple with grief. When Silas knelt beside her, he didn't reach out. He knew better than to touch a trapped animal. Her face was a map of exhaustion. Her eyes, once bright enough to light a room, were hollowed out, staring at something Silas couldn't see. "Mrs. Vance," he said, his voice like gravel grinding on stone. "The mare's at my gate. You're a long way from home." She didn't look at him. She just clutched a heavy, rusted iron key to her chest, so hard her knuckles were white. "He's coming," she whispered. Her voice was so thin the wind nearly stole it. "He's coming for the key. He's coming for the door." Silas looked back toward the ridge. Nothing moved but the hawks. But Silas felt it, that prickle on the back of his neck that told him the piece he'd built for 12 years was about to catch fire. He brought her back to his cabin, carrying her as if she were made of dry glass. He laid her on the cot by the wood stove and went to work. This was a part of the West where people didn't put in the songs, the quiet, heavy work of staying alive. He built the fire. He put the kettle on. He didn't ask her why she was bleeding from the wrists or why her boots were worn through to the skin. He just moved, while Silas tends to fire and the shadows grow long across the floor. Take a moment to settle in. Pour yourself a cup of coffee or a hot tea and let the steam rise. In the comments below, tell me where you're listening from and what time the sun is setting in your part of the world. We're glad you've joined us by the fire tonight. By the time the coffee was black and bitter, Clara had stopped shaking, but she hadn't let go of that key. Silas sat at his scarred oak table, cleaning his coat, not because it was dirty, but because the rhythm of the oil in the cloth gave her space to breathe. "Elias didn't fall," she said suddenly. Silas stopped his hands. He didn't look up. "No." "They pushed him," she said. "The men in the fine suits. The ones who want the valley for the railroad. They thought I'd sign the papers once he was on the ground. But Elias, he hid the truth. He hid it where they couldn't find it, down in the dark." She looked at Silas then, and for a second, the hollow look disappeared, replaced by a raw, jagged terror. "They've been at my house, Mr. Thorne, every night, tearing up the floorboards, watching me from the tree-lean. They think I have it, and I do, but I can't go back. Please, whatever you do, don't let them take the key. I'm just a man with a few head of cattle and a desire to be left alone, Mrs. Vance," Silas said quietly. "I know," she replied. "That's why I came to you, because you're the only man left who doesn't want anything from me." The next 3 days were quiet, but it was a kind of quiet that felt like a hell breath. Clara stayed inside, helping Silas mend sacks and peel potatoes. She didn't talk much, but she watched the windows. Every time a floorboard creaked, she flinched. Silas watched the ridge. On the 4th afternoon, the dust rose. 3 riders. They weren't wearing masks, which was worse. It meant they didn't plan on leaving anyone alive to identify them. At the lead was a man Silas knew by reputation, Julian Vane, a land agent who carried a silver-headed cane and a heart like a frozen pond. Silas stepped onto the porch. He didn't take the rifle, but it was leaning just inside the door. He stood there, thumbs hooked in his belt, as the riders pulled up. Thorne, Vane said, tipping his hat. It wasn't a gesture of respect. It was a threat. We're looking for a neighbor of yours. She's a bit confused. Wandered off with some property that doesn't belong to her. The only thing on my land is me and my stock, Silas said. Vane smirked, his eyes scanning the cabin. Now, Silas, you've got a reputation for being a smart man. Don't let a grieving widow turn you into a foolish one. That ranch of hers is railroad land now, and she's got something that belongs in a lawyer's hand. I don't much care for lawyers, Silas said, or men who ride onto a man's porch without an invitation. You've got till I count to 10 to turn those horses around. After that, the conversation gets real one-sided. Vane's smile didn't reach his eyes. He looked at the cabin one last time, then back at Silas. We'll be back, Silas. And when we come, we won't be bringing papers to sign. The dust is settling, but the storm is only just beginning. If you can feel the tension in the Montana air, hit that like button. It helps our stories reach more folks who love the Old West. And if you haven't yet, hit subscribe and ring that bell. Out here, you don't want to miss the next chapter of what's coming. That night, Clara told him. It's in the cellar, she said, under the house. Elias told me, just before the end. He said, Clara, if they kill me, don't open the cellar door. Not until you find someone who can stand against them. I thought I could stay there. I thought I could guard it. But I can hear them at night, scratching at the wood, trying to find the lock. Silas knew they couldn't stay at his cabin. Vane would bring 10 men next time. The only way out was through. Get your coat, Silas said. They rode under the cover of a moonless sky. The Vance Ranch was a lonely place. A 2-story house that looked like it was mourning its own existence. The windows were dark, like blind eyes. As they approached, Silas felt the heaviness of the place. It didn't feel like a home. It felt like a trap. He left the horses in the timber, and they crept toward the back porch. Clara was trembling, so hard the key rattled against the lock of the kitchen door. Once inside, the smell hit Silas, dust, stale bread, and the cold, metallic scent of fear. Where is it? Silas whispered. She pointed to a heavy wooden hatch in the corner of the kitchen, covered by a braided rug. There was a massive iron padlock on it, one that looked newer than the house. Don't open it, Clara begged suddenly, grabbing his arm. Her eyes were wide, reflecting the faint starlight. Silas, wait, maybe we should just burn the house down. Maybe some things are better left in the dark. Silas looked at her. He saw the bruises on her spirit. He saw the way she'd been carrying this secret, like a lead weight. You can't heal what you won't look at, Clara, he said. He knelt. He took the key from her shaking hand. He fitted it into the lock. It turned with a heavy, final clack. Silas heaved the door open. The hinges screamed. He lit a lantern and started down the narrow wooden stairs. The air was thick and cool. Clara stayed at the top, her silhouette a jagged shadow against the kitchen ceiling. Don't go down there, she whispered. Silas reached the bottom. The lantern light pushed back the shadows, revealing crates of winter apples, jars of preserves, and a small, sturdy desk in the corner. Silas walked to the desk. On it sat a ledger, but it wasn't the railroad papers. It was a diary. Beside it lay a badge, a Deputy U.S. Marshal star, tarnished but still holding its shape. Silas opened the ledger. His heart, which had survived the Civil War and a dozen skirmishes with outlaws, felt like it stopped in his chest. It wasn't just land deeds. It was a list. Names. Dates. Every bribe Julian Vane had paid. Every official in the territory who was on the payroll. But the last entry was dated the day Elias died. Vane isn't working for the railroad, Silas read aloud, his voice trembling. He's working for the governor. They're clearing the valley not for tracks, but for the gold veins we found in the North Creek. Elias found it. They killed him for it. But they didn't know Elias was a deputy marshal working undercover. But that wasn't why Silas's heart stopped. He moved the lantern further, to the corner behind the desk. There, wrapped in a Union cavalry blanket, was a small wooden box. Silas opened it. Inside was a photograph of a young man in a uniform. It was Silas's own face, 30 years younger, and a letter addressed to Silas Thorne. Silas felt the world tilt. He looked up at Clara, who was now standing at the foot of the stairs, her face bathed in the yellow lantern light. "Elias wasn't just your husband," Silas whispered, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. "He was my brother's boy, my nephew." Clara nodded slowly. "He told me about you, Silas. He said if anything happened, you were the only man with the iron in your blood to finish what he started. He didn't want you to open the door because he knew. He knew that once you saw the truth, you'd never be able to walk away again. He wanted to protect you from the war he was fighting." The sound of hooves shattered the moment. They weren't hiding anymore. Julian Vane and his men were in the yard. The orange glow of torches flickered through the cellar vents. "Thorne," Vane shouted from outside, "I know you're down there. Burn the house. Burn it all." Silas looked at the badge in his hand. He looked at the photo of the boy who had died, trying to do right by a land that only knew how to take. He felt something long dormant wake up inside him. The man who wanted to be left alone died in that cellar. The soldier stood up. "Stay here," Silas told Clara. He handed her his backup pistol. "If I don't come back, you take that ledger and you run for the hills. Don't look back." Silas climbed the stairs. He stepped into the kitchen as the first torch hit the porch. The heat was immediate. He didn't sneak. He didn't hide. He stepped out onto the burning porch, his Winchester leveled. The first shot took the torch out of Vane's hand. The second took the hat off his head. "I'm done talking, Vane." Silas roared over the crackle of the flames. "This isn't railroad land. This is U.S. Marshal land, and you're trespassing on a grave you aren't big enough to fill." The fight was short, sharp, and bloody. Silas moved like a shadow in the smoke. He didn't fight like a rancher. He fought like a man who had nothing left to lose and a nephew to avenge. By the time the neighbors from the surrounding ranches arrived, drawn by the fire and the gunfire, Vane was in the dirt, and his men had vanished into the night. The house didn't burn down. Silas and Clara fought the fire with wet blankets and a determination that the valley hadn't seen in years. As the sun began to peek over the Montana ridges, painting the sky in bruises of purple and gold, Silas sat on the porch steps. His hands were charred, his face streaked with soot. Clara sat beside him. She'd finally put the key in her pocket. "What happens now?" she asked. Silas looked out at the land. It was the same land as yesterday, but it looked different. The shadows weren't as heavy. "Now," Silas said, "we ride to the Capitol. We show them the ledger. We show them the star. And we make sure Elias's name is written in something better than dust." He looked at her, and for the first time, Silas Thorne smiled. It was a small, tiring thing, but it was real. You don't have to be a widow today, Clara. You just have to be a survivor. Asterisk out here in the West, we spend a lot of time locking doors. We lock our cellars to keep the secrets out, and we lock our hearts to keep the pain in. But sometimes, the only way to find the light is to break the lock and face the dark. It takes courage to open that door, and even more to stand in the doorway when the fire starts. If this story meant something to you tonight, if it reminded you that even the most solitary soul can find a reason to fight, let us know in the comments. We love hearing your thoughts. And before you go, make sure you're subscribed so you can ride with us on the next trail. Until then, keep your coffee hot, your powder dry, and never be afraid to see what's behind the cellar door. We'll see you in the next story. Asterisk.